There are more controversies heading into this World Cup than ever before. In front of me, we've got a map highlighting some of the countries whereby there have been issues as teams get ready to go and play in the tournament. We've had attempted boycotts in Canada to a manager ousted in France. Today, we're going to talk about 3 of those countries. Let's start with Spain. It's easy to think of controversies are taking place in smaller, far-flung FIFA federations, but Spain are one of the most highly thought of nations in the world when it comes to football. In women's football, it's no different. Spanish teams have dominated youth international football for a number of years, but Spain at a senior level, they've never won a knockout game at an international tournament, and it looked like they could be heading to this World Cup without a huge chunk of their senior team. Why is that? Well, it's all kind of got to do with one man, Jorge Vilda. Vilda has been in charge of Spain since 2015. And after they were knocked out by England in the Euros last summer at the quarter-final stage, some of his players approached him and said they felt like it wasn't really working anymore. They also approached Luis Rubiales, head of the Spanish Federation, hoping that he might be able to move Vilda on. Nothing really happened after that. And so 15 players, known as Las Quince, decided to send a letter to the Federation outlining their concerns. When that letter was leaked, they took it public. So these are the 15 players who wrote the letter. Now there's some really standout names here. Players like Aitana Bonmatí, a favourite for the Ballon d'Or this year, Patrick Guijarro, she was their third choice captain, Mapi Leon, Barcelona's starting centre-back, and you'll notice a lot of these players came from certain clubs. So we've got a lot of Barcelona players here, a lot of players who are also based abroad, so a couple of United players, a couple of City players, and crucially, no Real Madrid players. And this is what they said publicly. First of all, the players regret that the IFEF has made public in a partial and self-interested manner a private communication with information which affects our well-being. Basically, they were annoyed that something that they'd wanted to talk about in private had been leaked to the press by the Federation. They felt like it undermined their position, and it meant that they were saying they did not want to play for Spain anymore whilst Vilda was still in charge. The Spanish Federation's reaction to this was to do nothing, and instead call up a load of other different Spanish players. Over time, this meant the group started to fracture. It all began when Irene Paredes and Jenny Hermoso returned to the national team. Now, they hadn't signed the initial letter, but were seen as being associated with the group that had. Once they were back, other players started phoning Jorge Vilda and saying, "We know the World Cup's coming up and we want in." That included players like Aitana Bonmatí, like Onabatie, and like Sandra Paños, the Barcelona goalkeeper. But others weren't to be moved. They said if Vilda was in charge, they weren't going back. One of them was Mapi Leon. This is what she said. "As of today, I will not be in the World Cup. It's a shame. It's not a decision to be taken lightly, but my decision is clear. I have a way of life and values. I can't go back if the situation doesn't change." So where has that left Spain? Well, there are 3 players from this original list who aren't going to the World Cup. Mapi Leon, as we've already said, but also Patrick Guijarro, who scored twice in the Champions League final this year, and Barcelona teammate Claudia Pina. There are also 3 players from the list who are going: Onabatie, Aitana Bonmatí, and Mariona Caldente. All of those chose to change their minds and were consequently called up. But regardless of those 3 players returning to the squad, it's still astounding that this many players refused to play for Jorge Vilda, and the Spanish Federation's response was to do nothing about it. So let's go back to our map and take a look at another country, Nigeria, the most successful African nation in women's football. One of only a handful of teams to have qualified for every single World Cup, 11 Women's Africa Cup of Nations titles. But the 21st century has caused them issues. There have been constant protests stretching back from 2004, where there was a sit-in stage at a hotel in South Africa during the African Cup of Nations over unpaid bonuses. Training was boycotted at the 2007 World Cup, similar financial issues there. At the WAFCON in 2016, they occupied a hotel for 13 days as a result, again, of unpaid bonuses. More protests in 2019 at the World Cup then, and taking us all the way up to the present day, 2023, where they are threatening to boycott the opening World Cup match after the Federation says they will not pay bonuses. Now, this is a specific issue that has come about from the way FIFA is dividing its prize pot this year. Everyone who plays in the group stage will get at least $30,000 for participating. That goes up the further you go in the competition. This is actually the same issue that England are currently in disagreement with the FA over. But it's not just players that the Nigerian Federation have fallen out with, it's also their coach, Randy Waldrum, This is what he said on a podcast the other week. "We still have players that haven't been paid since 2 years ago. It's a travesty. In October, every country was given $960,000 from FIFA to prepare for the World Cup. Where is that money?" In response, a spokesperson for the Nigerian Federation called him an incompetent loudmouth and said he was their worst ever manager. They've also banned Nigeria's assistant manager, Lauren Gregg, from attending the World Cup because her and Waldron refused to include a goalkeeper that they had never seen play before in the Nigerian squad. It feels like there's been a sense of complacency from the Nigerian Federation about their team's position in African women's football, but we've seen countries like South Africa, Morocco, and Zambia all take massive strides forward in recent years. Now, if Nigeria do carry through with their threat and boycott that opening group game against Canada, the Nigerian Federation might not be able to ignore their demands any longer. One final country we can look at here is Jamaica. Now, Jamaica have one of the most inspirational stories in international women's football. They were disbanded in 2008 and didn't reform again till 2014, but by 2019 they became the first Caribbean nation to qualify for the Women's World Cup. However, that wasn't all sunshine and roses, and after the tournament they had to go on strike in order to get paid for their participation in the competition. Now, 2023, they've qualified again, but the same issues are still arising. This was a statement that the whole Jamaican team released back in June. You can see here there are a huge number of issues that they needed to raise, everything from transportation to training to nutrition and to pay. Basically, anything that involves being in a football team. Once again, they said our questions go unanswered and our concerns unresolved. These issues even led to a GoFundMe being set up by one of the players' mothers in order to help fund their trip to Australia. In this age of increasing professionalisation of women's football, it's easy to forget that there are huge numbers of teams across the world whereby even the most basic needs aren't being met by their federations in order to allow them to compete on the world's biggest stage. On the graphic, we've got Bunny Shaw. She finished second top scorer in the WSL this season, playing up front for Manchester City. A stark reminder of the gap between domestic and international football. Now, this level of controversy might seem like more than we've ever had before, and in some ways, it is more than we've ever seen before, but these aren't new issues. These are problems that have been going on throughout the history of women's football, and it's only really now that the Women's World Cup has become a stage big enough for players to want to step forward and make people take notice of what is going on in their day-to-day experiences of playing for their international teams. That's why we might see more protests than ever before at this year's World Cup.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.